Hiya, it's Carly from Kip McGrath in Carlisle, and today we're looking at fractions, decimals and percentages, and specifically converting in between them. So the first thing I want to start off with is some of the basic fractions. Okay, these ones children would be expected to just know. So that's where I always start with. These are the ones we want to learn, and then we'll look at how you can use strategies to work between them. So a half as a decimal is quite simply 0.5. To turn that into a percentage, it's 50%. Just go over that one for you. There we go. So we've got 50%, 0.5. A quarter, now often I say to children, well, that's half of a half. So sometimes if they're finding a quarter of something, we can say half it and half it again. So if they get into that habit, then we're just halving this decimal. So we end up with 0.25. which is then 25%. So we take two numbers after the decimal place and pop a percentage sign on them, and that's what gives us our percent. Essentially what we're doing is timesing by 100. Okay, a third, again, one we're just going to have to learn is 0.33 recurring. So the 3 would keep going forever, and so therefore we've got 33.3 recurring percent. Okay, an eighth then. So that is half of a quarter. So that you could come back to this one and say, okay, let's half that again. And so we end up with 0.125, which is therefore 12.5%. And our last one that they'd be expected to just know is a fifth, which is 0.2, which is therefore 20%. Okay, so those are the ones that we'd be expecting children to know and have learned off by heart. But then we've also got the idea of how we work between the different ones. So for example, let's have a look at some of the different ways. We'll just wipe this one off. Okay, so say we started off and we're going from a fraction to a decimal. So what I would tell children here is that the easiest way to go from a fraction to a decimal is to try and get the denominator to be 10 or 100. If we get the denominator to be 10, for example, we had 3 over 10, then that would give us 0.3 because this column is our tenths. If we had something over 100, then it would be 0.56 because we've got tenths and hundredths. However, it's not always going to be possible to get to 10 or 100 on the bottom as a denominator of our fraction. And so the other thing I remind children is that a fraction is literally a division. So if I've got 1 over 8, which we've talked about that they should know, but it's still a good illustration, we've actually got 1 divided by 8 because that's what this means. And so then, whenever we need to work out a fraction to a decimal, we can literally just do a division. So when we're doing 1 divided by 8, the 1 goes on the inside, the 8 on the outside, and we're going to pop a few decimal places on, a few zeros, because we're probably going to need them. So then we would look at, does 8 go into 1? No. So we carry over that 1. Always line your decimal point up with your answer. Does 8 go into 10? Yes, once. Remainder 2. 8's into 20, 2, remainder 4, 8's into 40, goes 5 times, and that's as far as we go. So then we can say that 1/8 is 0.125. So the method for getting from fraction to a decimal is either to get the denominator to a 10 or 100 or 1,000, or it would be to actually do the division of the top number, the numerator, divided by the denominator. So 1 divided by 8. Okay? So that's how we're going to get from a fraction to a decimal. If we wanted to go from a fraction to a percentage, we would probably encourage the children to do the same thing. So to get to the decimal answer and then from there to go to the percentage. So it's kind of a two-step process. So like what we just did, when we got from 1/8 to 0.125, we would then say, okay, how do we get from that decimal to a percentage? So this is really covering decimal to percentage as well. is what we would do is we would times by 100. To get from a decimal to a percentage, we're timesing by 100. Quick reminder that when we times by 100, we are moving the decimal point 2 places. Okay, so all the numbers are moving along. It's getting 100 times bigger. So if it's getting bigger, the decimal point has to go that way. And it goes 2 places because there's 2 zeros. So 1, 2 places, and it now comes in here. So we've got 12.5%. Okay, so timesing by 100, we're going to move our decimal place to the right 2 places, and then we've got 12.5%. So that covers our fractions to percentages and also our decimals to percentages. So we've done everything from the fraction point of view. If we wanted to go from a decimal to a fraction, that's quite a nice easy one. So for example, if I had 0.8, this is our tenths column. So I would quite literally have 8 tenths because I've got 8 in my tenths column. If, for example, just out of curiosity, if I had 2.8, then we have 2 still as our whole number, and we have 8 tenths. So the fraction part of it doesn't change, but this obviously just becomes a mixed number. Okay, so now we're looking at our next one. So now we've got 0.67. So we've got 2 numbers. We've got something in the tenths and we've got something in the hundredths. And what I tend to say to children is, if I've got 2 numbers after the decimal point, I'm going to have 2 zeros on the bottom. So I'm going to have 100. So I've got 67 hundredths. Or the fact that we go as far as the hundredths column tells me it would be hundredths. So 67 hundredths. Okay, it carries on the same. So they might get something like 0.326. Okay, 3 numbers after the decimal point, tenths, hundredths, and now we've got thousandths. So because we go as far as thousandths, our bottom number is going to be 1,000. Or because I've got 3 numbers, I've got 3 zeros, and then I simply write 326 on the top. Okay, so very easy doing our decimals to our fractions. We've already looked at our decimals to our percentages, and so now all we've got left to look at is going from our percentages. So if we were to go from a percentage to a decimal, so I've been given 65%. Okay, we're just going to do the reverse of what we did when we were going from a decimal to a percentage. So the reverse is to now divide by 100. So if I divide by 100, I'm now getting 100 times smaller. So I'm moving to the left and I'm moving 2 places because there's 2 zeros. So we've got an invisible decimal point here. We don't write them when they're at the end of a number and there's nothing after it, but we've got a decimal point there. So I'm moving it, and we've said 2 places to the left. So 1, 2. So our new decimal is 0.65. Okay. If, for example, we had 30%, we still move that decimal 2 places. So it's here, 1, 2, and we end up with 0.30. And what I would say to children at this point is that 0 doesn't actually represent anything. It's not worth anything because it's after the decimal place. So we can just write 0.3. Okay, so from a percentage to a decimal, we're dividing by 100. That leaves us with just one thing left, to go from a percentage to a fraction. So let's have our percentages again. Let's go with 72%. 72%. What is a percent out of? That's my question for the children. What is it out of? Well, percent is always out of 100. I know that a lot of people say things like 110, I give it 110%. That's mathematically incorrect and quite frustrating, but that's what people say. So remind them, it's out of 100. Percent, cent means 100. Century, centipede, all of those come from the root word cent, which means 100. Okay, so 72%. 72 out of 100. That's how you would write it from a percentage to a fraction. However, there's always the added extra bonus that they will expect you to then simplify your fraction down to its lowest terms, okay? So we're going to have a look at our 72 out of 100 and we're going to think, okay, what can I divide that by? Well, they're both even, so easy way, let's just start by halving it. Okay, so we're going to halve both of those numbers and we're going to get 36 out of 50. Still even, so they still half. So we're going to get 18 out of 25. And at that point, I'm looking to see if there's any common multiples. Well, 18 divides by 1 and 18, 2 and 9, 3 and 6. 25 divides by 1 and 25, and 5 and 5. So we know that there's no common multiples, so that is, common factors. And so that is as far as we can go on that one. So once we've got 2 our fraction, we simplify it, and that will be our final answer. Okay, so we've divided and we've got to this. You might also be given a nice easy one, 50%. Well, as we've discussed, that's just 50 out of 100, which simplifies. If we've got a number on the top that is half as big as the number on the bottom, we've just got a nice half. Okay, so what we're doing is we put our percentage over 100 and then we simplify it. Okay, by looking for common factors, not common multiples. That was my mistake. We're looking for common factors. Okay, so that's your fractions, decimals, percentages and conversion. This is something that children find very difficult, and so it's something that they need to do repeatedly. Possibly, if you're homeschooling them at the moment, even drop it in for 10 minutes every day, because they do find this tricky and it will be something that repetition will help them remember it. Okay, if you've got any questions, just pop them in the comments. Thanks.